Okay, my timer has started now. So great. Want to thank Jerry so much for this amazing invitation to come back to my alma mater. When I graduated in 2005, I thought this was an amazing place, but I come back now and it's even more amazing. They have lots of new buildings, not 1950s style ziggurats. And also I was thinking about sitting in the audience yesterday, something like this, trying to connect business practitioners and researchers really wouldn't have existed in 2005 here, I don't think. So I think that's a big improvement as well. So Jerry asked me to say a little bit about what research can say about China. And I've decided to do this in, sort of a very business school fashion. Give you a little mini case of the MBA's experience in China. They've been in the news with some controversies recently, which you might have known about. I actually visited the MBA with some students, MBA headquarters in Beijing in December, so have some insights from that. And then say how some of this case study illustrates some research principles. So, to get started, it's really important to know just what a big thing the MBA is in China. I think they probably make more money in the US, but way more viewers in China. 605 million TV viewers of NBA programs, way more than in the US. 79 billion cumulative video on demand downloads. So huge sports, huge entertainment. There was a controversy towards the end of last year. You probably have heard. So the Houston Rockets general manager named Daryl Morey tweeted support for the protests in Hong Kong. Very quickly, he deleted this because he got some critique from some Chinese audiences and apologized. The NBA president, Adam Silver, went public saying we were being asked to fire him by the Chinese government. We said there's no chance that's happening. There's no chance we'll even discipline him. So the reaction was pretty swift and pretty severe. You can see some headlines here. Morey's comments trigger NBA China crisis. CCTV, China Central Television, who was airing the 605 viewers was on CCTV. Tencent, the online platform, suspended game broadcasts. There were some NBA events canceled. And then, this last headline I think is pretty interesting. Chinese people tell the NBA, freedom of speech isn't an excuse to insult. And I think this is sort of the crux of the issue. In the US, we have obviously this, core bedrock value, freedom of speech. Although, there is some speech that actually would be considered over the line. And I think sort of understanding in different societies where the line is what's important and what's an insult or not. And I'll say a little bit more about that. So, like I said, visited the NBA in December. I was really surprised when they accepted my email, sort of asking to come visit them, given the sort of controversy and difficulty. I know, some other Chinese companies that been involved in the trade war, actually, I tried to get in touch with and they declined, but the NBA very graciously let us in. And we asked our host, this guy here named Greg Stoltz, who was a professional basketball player and is now one of the executives at the NBA in China, what lessons have you learned? He said, pretty obvious, but we should have worked on our government relations. I think, the NBA's success sort of with the population really, resulted in them not necessarily reaching out with the government as much as they wish that they would have. And as I reflected on that and thinking about sort of what research in our field, management and networks research would suggest, that, there's something to be said for that, obviously. Having connections with government is really important to firms. They want to sort of shape the market, get preferential access, get information. And there's lots of research on this, particularly from the US context. Just think about lobbying. I mean, as an example of this, organizations, companies trying to shape legislation or political action to their benefit. But in China, what some of my research and other folks have found is that actually the relationship's a little bit more two-sided when you actually establish relationship with the government. And there's this sort of binding effect. So I saw the title of Doug's presentation. It's called The Age of Co-optation. So I won't say a lot about co-optation, but that's essentially what part of what these government ties are trying to do in China is actually the government getting a relationship with the firm to influence it in ways in which it sort of wants the firm to act. So sort of similar along these lines, what the NBA folks said is that, you know, since the controversy, they've really, you know, they've instituted a variety of sort of cultural sensitivity training and a variety of sort of interactions with their executives and people in the U.S. to sort of understand the China context better, which may or may not be a good thing. And there's Yao Ming, who very famous NBA basketball star, who's Chinese, and has been very helpful for them in sort of bridging this gap. He's actually the president of the Chinese Basketball Association, and you can see him there in front of the Great Hall of the People, is actually a delegate on one of the main sort of legislative bodies in China. So this idea of sort of these networks in China having sort of these, in some ways, double-edged sword focus is something that I've heard a lot from Chinese entrepreneurs. You know, many folks you hear, you know, work with the government, like Huawei's leaders have sort of, you know, famously discussed like around that in the US. But many entrepreneurs I talk to say, you know, actually, I don't want to actually interact that much with the government because, you know, maybe I'd be able to get some benefits, but also then there'd be some expectations the other way. Okay, so why is this such a big deal? This sort of insult of saying, you know, the Hong Kong people should be allowed to sort of protest and support. You know, I think that, you know, thinking about sort of some basic political science helps us understand this. So thinking about how the Chinese Communist Party maintains its legitimacy to rule the people of China. So, so in democracies, you know, governments have their legitimacy to rule from elections. So they've been chosen by the people. So, you know, this sort of justifies them, although recent years in the US accept it, I guess. In autocracies, there's a few ways to actually, you know, effectively rule. I mean, so force and coercion is one. It's actually really pretty hard to do over time. Another is performance. So actually, you know, perform in a variety of ways, frequently economic. And this, you know, people are happy, they feel the government's doing a good job, there's no sort of pressure to change things. So, you know, in China, what this means is economic growth being one, of course, but also national unity and patriotism. And then finally, also just generally maintaining political order and stability. And so here, these last two, you can see where this case really violates those, you know, core principles of the government's legitimacy to rule, and so why they might actually take sort of some serious exception to that. You can see, you know, this from many sort of leading Chinese and American businessmen sort of articulate this point. So I don't know if you know Josiah, he's a co-founder of Alibaba and owns one of the 30 NBA teams, the Brooklyn Nets. Interestingly enough, he actually was born in Taiwan, educated in the US, went to Yale. So he's not, you know, he's not even really, you know, deeply ingrained in the mainland Chinese society growing up, but he sort of described here that, you know, sort of like these last two issues on performance legitimacy that I mentioned, that, you know, this is an issue that is insulting in a way both to the government and the people that sort of makes it just too objectionable, non-negotiable to say. So I think this is sort of interesting. You know, considering these other sort of performance legitimacy characteristics and the current situation, you know, so this idea of economic performance, social control, and stability, you know, the coronavirus has a huge, you know, sort of threat to those sort of pillars of the CCP rule. You know, one being economic, of course, and it'll be interesting to see how, you know, how much of an economic effect that will have. You know, the government is doing tremendous work to try to mitigate that and get people back to work, et cetera. So we'll find out. But also, you know, this idea that the management of the virus and the, you know, sort of international critique and of that has, you know, led to further internet controls. So, you know, this idea that the government is trying to really enforce internet censorship with, even more severely. Second sort of set of pictures over there to your right is actually, again, sort of on this trip with the students in December. We visited a technology firm that supplies cameras to monitor neighborhoods. They sort of surprisingly to me, actually took us to one of their control rooms. And you can see sort of on the left here, there's the, sort of photos from the streets. You can see like sort of, like the boxes around people's faces and bodies. And, the students asked, so do residents mind that actually people are being monitored? And they were like, no, they're actually quite happy. A mom a couple days ago lost her 4-year-old son and came directly to our control center, and we were able to locate him through the system. So, this idea that, social stability and control being sort of a core pillar, now with AI technology, sort of like the dream situation for an authoritarian regime to be able to, sort of monitor and control its citizens. As a final point, I just want to mention, because my timer's flashing red. I teach a class, in addition to taking the students to China, I teach a class on doing business in China. And, this is, in this year actually has been the most interesting year, and I'm not sure why, but, the issue that the students grapple with tremendously on that, which relates very much to this MBA issue is, is there international or sort of universal values versus local laws? So Google, as you know, maybe 10, 15 years ago, pulled out of China because they were being asked to censor results. And they felt that, as a US company, they, were for freedom of speech, free information. That was something that they could not do. Similar to the MBA, Adam Silver saying, okay, we support Daryl Morey. We're not going to discipline him. He has his right to say what he wants, which is very much US values. But as you can see, Google does not compete in China. NBA, this hundreds of $1 million market, they're now shut off from. And those two are very rare cases. Most businesses, you can see sort of on your right here, the sort of Financial Times article saying, that the US airlines caved to the pressure from China over Taiwan, sort of putting Taiwan as part of the mainland China on their websites, I believe is what that was about. And this is what, the hundreds of really probably cases, and you frequently see them in the news, fashion brands, other retailers doing a variety of things that sort of fit under this sort of, sort of performance legitimacy umbrella that is very important for the government. And this is, we debate this a lot in class because you think that, on the one hand, we do have something, sort of important values like freedom of speech, but also, countries have rules and laws. And, if you want to say, like Google, for instance, that your sort of universal values are more important than some countries' laws so that you can, in some ways don't have to adhere to them, that's, pretty extreme, and probably why sort of very few companies have, sort of chosen to, sort of not adhere to the Chinese law. So I know I'm out of time, so that's basically it. Thank you very much, and I'll turn it over to Doug.